I would like to share with you a perspective on the current times. There's an awful lot going on, an awful lot of questions that we need to ask, that we should ask. And what I'd like to do is step back to 35,000 feet and view this from a historical perspective and try to put the current situation in a much more clearly defined light. And to do that, I'd like to begin with a pasuk in Chumash. Moshe Rabbeinu, in his very last address to the Klal Yisrael, gives them tochacha, gives them words of Musar. And these are his words: Zachar Yemos Olam. Why didn't you study the ways of history? Binu shnos dor v'dor. You should have studied generation to generation. Shalavicha ve'agedcha. Ask your father, and he'll tell you. Zekinecha v'yomrulach. Your zekinim, the elders, will explain to you. The pasuk is saying, study history. Moshe Rabbeinu says you should have studied history. You should have seen what happened generation after generation. Had you seen that, you would have learned a great lesson. But the pasuk doesn't explain to us what that lesson is. Rashi on that pasuk does tell us what that lesson is. Binu shnos dor v'dor means you should have studied history. And you should have studied what happens generation after generation, and you would have seen the hand of Hashem. You would have seen the hand of Hashem guiding his people, directing his people. And from that you would have recognized that Hashem has the power to redeem his nation, to bring his nation to the time of Mashiach, and to bring you to the world to come. Your flaw was you didn't study history, you didn't pay attention. And this Rashi seems to tell us that when one studies history, he'll see a tremendous lesson of Hashem's guidance, Hashem's helping the Jewish nation. The only problem with this Rashi is that quite the opposite seems to be correct. If you study Jewish history, it's very difficult to find a generation that didn't suffer immense pain, torture, affliction. It's very difficult to find a time that we weren't oppressed, that we weren't killed, that we weren't expelled. So what does Rashi mean? If you studied history, you'll see the Yad Hashem. If anything, Jewish history seems to be a question on Hashem, and yet Rashi tells us it's the greatest chizuk. And to understand this Rashi, we need a perspective. And to begin this perspective, let me share with you a story. Adolf Hitler began his rise to power by speaking in the beer pubs in Bavaria. Small groups, 100, 200 people would be gathered there, and he would stand up and rant and rave for an hour on end. The problem with Germany is the Jews. It's either the fatherland of the Jews, and I choose the fatherland. On and on and on he would rant. At one such meeting, in the back of the room is an elderly man, clearly Jewish. And when Hitler's finished his speech, the audience leaps to its feet, applauds, and this old man joins in them in applause. And Hitler notices this. And Hitler goes over to this older man and says, "Don't you think I meant when I said that I will make Germany Judenrein? Don't you think I meant to destroy the Jewish nation?" And the old man looks at Hitler and says, "Oh, I assumed you were serious. But you have to remember, we're an old people. Thousands of years ago, there was an evil king Pharaoh. When he enslaved our people, God saved us from him. And in honor of that, we have the beautiful holiday of Passover. The family gets together for 8 days. Along came Haman, an evil king. When he tried to kill us, God saved us from him. In honor of that, we have the beautiful holiday of Purim, festivities, merrymaking. Along came the Greek Syrians, and when God saves us from them, we have the holiday of Hanukkah. But you, Hitler, you hate us more than all of them. When God saves us from you, what a holiday there'll be." There is no celebration. There are no holidays that mark the salvation of the Jewish people from the Third Reich. But despite the fact that it was the greatest attempt of any organized, systematic, modern apparatus to destroy this nation, the most powerful force in earth at its time, and nevertheless the Jewish people are still here, and the Third Reich isn't. And it's quite interesting because we are an old people. And for the past 2,000 years, we've suffered through crusades, Spanish Inquisition, blood libels, pogroms, persecution, mass murders, gassing. There's no shortage of creativity when it comes to killing Jews. Find me a method of torture. Know full well it was used on the Jews. Find me a way to kill another man. No, it was well used on the Jews, who were stabbed, shot, hung, clubbed, burned, gassed to death, beaten to death. And yet we are still here. We are still here. And the ironic question is, where are our ancient enemies? Where is the great powerful Egyptian dynasty today? Where is the Persian Empire? Where are the Greek Syrians? All of the great powers of the earth rose to shine in their might. When they were in the height of their glory, they rose against the Jews, attempted to kill them. They vanished from the face of history, and the Jewish people alone of all the ancient people are still around telling the tale. And in fact, we do have a holiday called Pesach because Hashem saved us from the Egyptians. We have a holiday called Purim because Hashem saved us from Haman. And we have a Hanukkah because Hashem saved us from the Greek Yevonim. And this simple reality, and every nation seems to rise against us, and every nation does its best, and they pass through the dust of history, and the Jewish nation is still around to talk about it. And I believe if you'd like to see the Yad Hashem, all you have to do is study this strange phenomena. This one lone sheep among 70 wolves, and the wolves attack and attack generation after generation, and there's no end. And yet somehow the sheep survives. The wolves are no longer there. And they're no longer telling the tale, but the sheep survives, exile to exile, sent from continent to continent, and yet he remains. And if you'd like to see the Yad Hashem, I believe all you have to do is study Jewish history. Because when you study Jewish history, what you see is Hashem guiding his people, generation after generation, always leading them. They'll land in a particular area, and they're foreigners. And they begin reaffirming their Judaism. They learn Torah, and they begin flourishing. They become stronger and stronger, and they rise to prominence. And when they reach prominence, they begin building the society in which they live. They become chief economists, chief innovators. They become powerful, and then they begin assimilating. And the next generation starts adopting the Gentile ways, another generation, and then a powerful wind comes and sweeps them out. And they land on another shore, and then as foreigners again, they reattach themselves to Torah, and they begin growing, they begin flourishing, and then they become very, very central in that new society. They become contributing members, leading members, they become more powerful, and suddenly the next generation starts assimilating, the next generation further still, and a new wind comes and sweeps them out. Says the Meshech Chochmah, that is Jewish history. Hashem guiding his people, always keeping them distinct, always keeping them as an Am HaNivchar, a chosen nation, distinct and different from the Gentiles amongst whom they live. And if you'd like to see the Yad Hashem, I believe that's exactly the point. Study Jewish history. But maybe you'll say, that's my perspective. I'm a Jew. Maybe that's our perspective because we're biased, we're prejudiced. I'd like to share with you some quotes from secular historians who have no religious bias whatsoever, who looked at history with a very clear, objective sense. And let's begin. The Jewish Dispersion by Lezinsky. And these are his words. For 1900 years, from the destruction of the Second Temple to the establishment of the modern state of Israel, the Jewish people have wandered literally around the world. And this wandering was usually precipitated by intolerable spiritual or physical persecution. The scope of the Jews' 1900 years exile is reflected in the lands from which they were en masse expelled. And now he's going to tell us the lands from which we were expelled. For example, in the 3rd century, they were expelled from Carthage, North Africa. 5th century from Alexandria. 6th from France. 7th from the Catholic Empire. 9th from Italy. 11th from Mainz, France, Germany, Switzerland. 14th from Switzerland, Hungary, Germany. 15th from Austria, Spain, Lithuania, Portugal, Germany, Papal States, the Netherlands, Ukraine, Lithuania. It reads like a world atlas. In fact, if you'd like to understand Jewish history, I'll give you a little challenge. Go on a nice Sunday morning to the United Nations building, and outside you'll see all the flags furling in the wind. I challenge you to find me a flag of a nation that didn't kick us out. And the only flag you'll find, either there were no Jews there at the time, or the nation didn't exist. Because we were expelled en masse, killed, murdered, gassed by every single nation in which we found ourselves. And this is history. Let me share with you another quote. Leo Tolstoy, not a Jewish perspective at all. He wrote an article called, What is the Jew? What is the Jew? This is not as strange a question as it first appeared to be. Come, let us contemplate what kind of unique creature is this, whom all the rulers and all the nations of the world have disgraced and crushed, expelled and destroyed, persecuted, burned, and drowned, and who, despite their anger and their fury, continues to live and flourish. What is this Jew, who they never succeed in enticing with all the enticements in the world, whose oppressors and persecutors only suggest that he deny his religion, and he never does? The Jew is the symbol of eternity. They will never be able to destroy the Jew, neither bloodbath, nor fiction, nor fire, nor sword. The Jew is eternal. He is the embodiment of eternity. My friends, these are not the words of a Gemara. These are not a Rishon. These are the words of a secular historian defining this unique phenomena, this inexplicable reality. And I'll show you one more. One more example of a secular historian's perspective. John de Billa, a French author. He wrote in the latter part of the 19th century, in essence, the Jewish people chuckle at all forms of anti-Semitism. Think all you want, and you'll not be able to find one form of brutality or strategy that has not been used in warfare against the Jewish people. I cannot be defeated, says Judaism. All that you attempt to do to me today has been attempted 3,200 years ago in Egypt, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, afterwards the Romans, and others and others. There's no question that the Jew will outlive us all. This is an eternal people, and these are his concluding words. This is an exalted and chosen people. And my friends, these are words not of Jewish people, not of rabbis. This is the perspective of a historian from a secular vantage point. And let me share with you one more observation. The final words of Adolf Hitler. In 1945, when he's in the bunker deep underground and Germany clearly has lost the war, and he knows this is his last moment, he gets on the airwaves before he commits suicide, and he leaves his final address to the people. And these are his words. Above all, I charge the leaders of the nation and those under them to the scrupulous observance of the laws of race, and to the merciless opposition to the universal poison of all peoples, international Jewry. And then he took his life. The Third Reich was supposed to last at least 1,000 years. Where is it today? And yet we somehow are still here, still learning our Torah, still keeping our ways, still maintaining that who we were and that who we will be. Rav Yonason Eibschitz in his Siddur writes that when a secular person, when an atheist will study Jewish history, he should fall on his face and say, this is incredible, this is amazing, this is inexplicable, it is a miracle. And then Rav Yonason Eibschitz goes on to say one more step. If you were at Kriyas Yamsuf, imagine you're standing there and the sea splits into 12 separate parts, hundreds of feet down, walls straight up, the enemy chases, you're in there, and they chase you down. To see the miracle, you see them drown, you see them destroyed. Says Rav Yonason Eibschitz, if you study Jewish history, you'll see a miracle of far greater proportions, far more obvious and far more impactful than seeing the splitting of the sea. And my friends, I believe that's exactly the answer to this Rashi. What Rashi is saying, Zechar Yemos Olam, study history. Look what happens. Generation after generation, they rise upon us, they try to kill us, but they don't succeed. Hashem saves us, brings us from shore to shore. This is a unique people, a people with a mission, a people with a purpose, a people who have a destiny. Study. Zechar Yemos Olam Binu Shnos Dar Vadar. Says Rashi, when you study Jewish history, you'll see the might of our Creator. You'll see the fact that He has the capacity to bring us to the times of Mashiach and to the world to come. And I believe this is a very powerful perspective for our times. Because you see, we are living in rather miraculous times. And if you'd like to see the biggest miracle, maybe that even outshines that one, look at the simple reality that Israel exists today. After 1,900 years of exile, the Jewish nation finds himself back in our own land. A land that we left almost 2,000 years ago. And it's built up and so powerful that it rivals any other city-state maybe in the world, certainly for its size, well excels it by any means. And if you'd like to see the miracle, let's begin with a brief study of the history of Israel. 1880, Mark Twain visits Palestine. And he describes it. He describes it as an austere, barren wasteland. There was nothing. Tel Aviv was sand dunes. Jaffa was a port. You can't call it a port. There was some sticks of wood hanging out into the ocean people would park their boats next to. And when you see in such a short amount of time a nation built up, you're looking at something very, very interesting. But let's keep in mind probably the biggest aspect of the Nace. On May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. The Arab world did not exactly welcome us into statehood. They were not exactly celebrating. My father was born in Berlin in 1922. He escaped Germany in 1938, and he spent the years of the war in England. And he explained to me that when he read the papers that Israel has declared its statehood, he said everyone understood what was going to happen. There was going to be another Holocaust. 45, the World War II ended. This was 3 years after. There were 650,000 Jews living in what was now Israel, surrounded by 50 million Arabs. And May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel is declared. May 15th, 1948, 5 mechanized modern armies converge and attack on Israel from all fronts. Not one front, all fronts. But if you'd like to understand the miracle of the times, understand one fact. Until May 14th, Palestine was ruled by the British. And it was a simple rule that the British had. No Jew could own a gun. If a Jew was found with a gun, he was hung. And there was no marching armies, there was no navy, there was no air force. You had secret groups meeting, Haganah, the Irgun, undercover, gathering together small little arms. And if you'd like to know the odds of success, let me share with you the words of Azza Pasha, the Secretary General of the Arab League. This will be a war of extermination and a monumentous massacre, he announced. Paul Johnson wrote a fantastic book called The History of the Jew, and it's well worth reading. He writes as follows: May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. The entire armament of Israel, now he's going to tell us the full body of ammunition, guns, stores, rockets. The entire armament of the Israeli forces consisted of 17,600 rifles, 2,700 Sten guns, 1,000 machine guns, 45,000 soldiers. Outmanned, outnumbered, 5 mechanized armies with jeeps, tanks, howitzers, artillery. The Israelis had nothing. They had nothing. 45,000 soldiers with a few arms. And to give you a perspective on this, let me share with you 2 stories. Anecdotes, but true stories. Bet Eshel was a small kibbutz in the Negev, and they knew that as soon as the State of Israel was going to be declared, they'd be the first place to be hit, because not far from them was an Egyptian garrison, and this Egyptian garrison had 700 regular infantry, they had jeeps, they had tanks, howitzers, fully equipped army base. And no sooner was war declared than the barrage of rockets began firing onto the kibbutz. Then came the tanks, then came the jeeps, then came the troops. And after 1 month, a ceasefire was declared. The kibbutz was not overrun. But would you like to know the amazing part? And read Paul Johnson's book, because he details this fact. The entire armament of the kibbutz consisted of 12 rifles and 2 machine guns. One more story. When I was a boy, I read a book called The Birth of the Israeli Air Force. What was the Israeli Air Force? There was no Air Force. And there were a couple of farmers who had Piper Cubs. A Piper Cub is a small little plane, basically a go-kart with a propeller in front of it. And it was used for dust cropping to service the crops, to put insecticide down. And there were 2 farmers who owned Piper Cubs, and they said, we're going to be the Air Force. What they do, it was a 2-seater plane. Behind them, they took the back seat out, and behind them, they put a box of grenades. And the pilot would fly low, hold the steering wheel with one hand, with the other hand, take the grenade, pull the pin out, fly low over the troops, drop it, grenade after grenade, and they were very effective. The story is told that he goes for one flight, another flight, another flight. When he comes back, he says, fill up the grenades, I want to go back out. And the fellow says, there are no grenades left. There were no arms. They had nothing, and no grenades left. So the pilot thinks of it and says, okay, get me a case of soda bottles. What? Get me a case of soda bottles. They put a case of soda bottles behind him, and he flies down low behind the Egyptian lines. He drops the soda bottle, it hits the ground, explodes. The Egyptians hear the noise, see the plane, pop, they run. And he chased away those Egyptians. Now those are nice stories, but they read like fables. In the real world, the mighty win, the better arm is the victor. And in the real world that we live in, there's no way that this tiny sliver of Israel, a state the size of New Jersey, could possibly win that war. But not only did they win that war, and they won again in 56, 67, 73, and even now, ongoing hatred and conflict. But you have to remember something. At this point, you understand there's not a single Arab nation that dares to attack Israel. Why? Because they became they became Jew lovers? And it's because they understand they're so outmanned, so outgunned by Israel. Israel can take every single one of its enemies, as well as collectively all of them together, and put it in its back pocket. And the reason why Egypt made peace with Israel, the reason why Saudi Arabia is interested in peace, is because they recognize they're not going to destroy it. They can't win those wars. And yet somehow Hashem manages to arrange that we still have enemies who cause us a lot of issues, a lot of grief. But when you read these stories again and again, you begin to get an interesting perspective. And let me share with you that perspective. There's an article in the Mariv magazine, newspaper. Mariv is a secular Israeli newspaper, and this is entitled April 17th, 1983. They say, is this how things really happened? Just as we're told in the history books, 650,000 Jews escaped the horrors of the Second World War and the cruel struggle with the oppressive British. Did they really build up the whole infantry of their own efforts? Did 650,000 Jews create a nation state from emptiness and desolation? Fight off 5 mechanized armies? 5% of the Jewish people? By all logic and by all reason, everything that happened in 1948 is in the category of impossible. It was impossible for the Jews to win. It was impossible to bring the public service into operation from nothing. Impossible to establish a military industry from its beginnings, to sustain supplies and middle services. On and on. Looking back on the state of Israel, a secular Israeli newspaper defines it as miraculous. And I believe when you study this strange phenomenon called the existence of Israel as a people, and odder still, the existence of Israel now as a state back in its own land, you see a miracle of incredible proportions. But there's another step that I'd like to share with you. It is true that Adolf Hitler only succeeded in killing out 1/3 of the Jewish people. But he did succeed in killing out the entire Torah nation. Gone were all the great yeshivas of Poland. Gone were all the Torah centers of Russia. Gone was the Beis Medrash on every street corner. If you came to America in 1945, you would have seen a barren wasteland of spirituality. For decades now, the Jews would come over on the boat, they'd shave the payas and the beard, drop the tefillin overboard, and America was the golden Medina, the golden melting pot. And an intelligent assessment of Torah in 1945 would have said, it is impossible. Torah is dead. In America at the time, Rav Moshe Feinstein had a small fledgling yeshiva on the Lower East Side, 20 men around the table. RJJ about the same size. And Lakewood Rav Aaron had a tiny yeshiva. My father-in-law learned in Rav Aaron's yeshiva in the early days. And the story is told that one of the fine Balabatim, one of Rav Aaron's supporters, heard that the Rosh Yeshiva was building a new building, had plans to build a new building. And he came to Rav Aaron and says, Rosh Yeshiva, what in the world do you need such a large building for? Why, there's room for 200 guys to sit in that building. What in the world do you need such a building for? My friends, today there are not 200 people learning in Lakewood. 9,000 full-time learning Torah. Mir Yerushalayim, the same. I go to any street corner in Brooklyn. Yeshiva flourish, kollels flourish. Torah flourishes today as it never did before. The great yeshivas of Surah and Pumbedisa, we outshadow them. There's more full-time learning today than there was ever in the course of our history. And not only hasn't Torah died, quite the opposite. It has flourished, it has succeeded, and this alone is one of the greatest miracles. This alone is one of the most incredible features that you've ever seen. But there's another step. If you're over the age of bar mitzvah, you put on tefillin every day. The same tefillin that either Rashi or Tosfos put on, the same tefillin that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel put on, the same tefillin that Moshe Rabbeinu wore, with the 10 halacha l'Moshe Sinais that are not written in the Torah because they're halacha l'Moshe Sinais. They're given over in the Torah. You wear the same tzitzits, light the same candles, keep the same minhagim, keep the same kashrus as did our forefathers thousands of years ago, and we still argue in the same halacha. And if you'd like to understand why that is not just unique and not just incredible, but in the realm of miraculous, I'll share with you one simple observation. I was a Rabbi in Rochester, New York for about 12 years, and often I would take the children to Indian reservations around Rochester. And there you'd see the Indians in the full regala, the headdress, the moccasins, the deerskin, and they would do exhibitions. They would show what Indian life was like. I challenge you today to find me a Native American in the full regala of the American Indian. Find me an Indian wearing the headdress. Find me an Indian wearing the moccasins. Find me an Indian wearing buckskin. Why don't they dress that way? Even on the reservations, they wear jeans and t-shirt. Why? Because that's the way of the world. You assimilate, you blend in. Whatever the culture is, that's what everyone adopts and everyone becomes part of it. And for one nation to remain unique, to remain separate, to keep the very same ways of its father over 1900 years of destruction, embarrassingly hated, generation after generation expelled, tortured, murdered, and yet they keep their ways with exactitude and precision. You're watching a miracle that's incredible and unbelievable. But there is one more step. I live near what used to be Or Sameach Yeshiva, and for many years I was very involved in yeshiva, and we had guys over regularly. And I got a chance one Shabbos, actually Mincha, as I took 3 steps back and I looked up, I watched the sun setting in the ear hole of the fellow in front of me. He had an earring hole so big that I could watch Shkias Lacham, I could watch the sun go down in that hole. On the back of his neck, tattoos, on his hands, tattoos. This was a fellow who had come from very far. A few weeks later, the earring hole is sewed up. A few weeks after that, some of the tattoos are starting to, he's getting laser treatment, they're removed. A few months after that, he's wearing a davening jacket. You know what a davening jacket is? It's an old jacket that you put on the floor, put a footprint right in the center of it, put it on. That's what he's wearing to daven. And 2 years after that, he gets engaged to a fine Beis Yaakov girl, and I told my son, you must come with me. I want you to witness this scene. And this is a fellow whose grandmother did no longer lit Shabbos candles, and yet he comes back. And when you see thousands upon thousands of Bali Tshuva coming from such distant places, some far away, when you see a revival of this nation, and when you see them reaffirming themselves, you're looking at something miraculous. My friends, we are living in very, very incredible times. Never in the course of history has a nation been expelled, murdered, tortured, and remains alive, despite all of its enemies no longer being here. And never in the course of history does a nation leave its homeland for almost 2,000 years and then goes back and rebuilds its homeland against such odds, such oppression, and builds it up to be such a powerful and glorious and beautiful place that it is today. Never in the course of history does a nation keep its ways and its minhagim and exactitude of ways of doing things. And never in the course of history has there been the type of Baal Tshuva movement we currently see. And if you'd like to understand what all of these point to, it should be rather obvious. And that is, we are on the cusp of Mashiach coming. It should be clear to anyone with eyes to see. We are living in those very, very last moments. Exactly when, I don't know, you don't know. It's the job of a Navi. But it is very clear that all the signs of Mashiach coming are right here. And if you're not yet convinced, let me share with you one more step. 10 days ago, I would have told you, and I believe anyone with a good sense of perspective would have told you, that we as a nation are on the verge of a civil war. If you understand the divide in Israel between the left and the religious and the secular, it looked like it was going to be a civil war, a destruction of the society, and destruction of the way of life. It would have been over. And yet a mere 3 days after that, and certainly now, there's a unity, an achdus, am echad belev echad. All the reservists who said, I'm quitting the IDF, I will not be a part of this religious takeover, they rejoin. And everyone has put away their agenda, and everyone is joined together. Am echad belev echad. The unity is incredible. In my lifetime, I've never seen this togetherness, this achdus. It is incredible. It is beautiful. And while Hamas has a mighty, mighty, heavy price to pay, we also owe them a debt of gratitude that is incredible, because our nation has been saved. And it was a very heavy price to pay, and they will pay that price in Mitzvah Hashem. But the simple reality is, it's one more step along the path and one more step along the way. When you study Jewish history, Rashi is explaining to us, you'll see the hand of Hashem. You'll see the hand of Hashem guiding these people, protecting these people. This people has a mission. And anytime they're going to slip off, Hashem says, okay, I'm going to take care of the problem. And he sends a powerful wind, and that wind expels them and they go to another shore. Whether it's Queen Isabella, whether it's the Crusades, they're tortured, they're oppressed. And in that foreign land, they rebuild. They rebuild and they reflourish, and they keep the old ways, they rise again. And what you're watching is a nation on a mission, a nation with a purpose, a nation that will soon be redeemed when Mashiach comes. And every step along the way, it becomes more and more clear. To see such a hatred of Gentiles that makes no sense, that's inexplicable. Go to memory. Go to Palestinian Media Watch and see 7-year-old children, 5-year-old children mouthing the words, I'm going to be a martyr. I'm martyr number 7,342. They sing songs, Mickey Mouse songs, have camps. 65,000 children this summer were in Gaza camp. Very nice. UN sponsored, paid for by the UN. What do they learn in these camps? Well, what they learn is warfare, how to hate Jews, how to chant against Jews, and you can watch the videos. You watch them bragging. They march in. I'm martyr number 1,344. Behind them, I'm martyr number 2. I'm martyr. And they brag about their friends who killed themselves. And they brag about themselves wanting to die. And watch memory. Go on MERMR, memory. Don't go on the internet, but if you do, go to memory. And you'll see what they do is they take the Palestinian videos and they translate that so you understand what's being spoken about. And I've seen this quite a number of times, a conversation between two Palestinian men, well-dressed, articulate, and one says to the other, these Israelis, these Jews, they're such fools. They love life. We Palestinians, we love death. We love nothing more than dying for our homeland. That's what every Palestinian mother lives for her child to die, to be a martyr. These foolish Israelis, they love life. We Palestinians love death. My friends, that is rather peculiar. It is inexplicable. And according to the ways of the world, it makes no sense, because these are not deeply religious fanatics even. They are fanatics, but not from a Muslim basis. That hatred is something that Hashem excites, Hashem blows winds, because that's what this nation needs at this point. Our enemy is an extraordinarily inexplicable phenomena, and they must be eradicated because the hatred is so venomous, so permeating the essence of them. When you're dealing with an entire generation, remember, Hitler was somewhat influential over the 30-year-olds. The real danger was the Hitler youth. When you're 12 years old and you're indoctrinated, and all you know is Mein Kampf, and all you know is the fatherland, you become a robot programmed to the agenda. When you deal with a nation there, 50% of the Palestinians today are youth. And they're indoctrinated, they're encultured. Obviously not everyone is a terrorist, not everyone is an extremist, but this is the culture. Hamas rules, and this is the culture. This is what's on TV, this is what's in the schooling, this is what the clerics teach, and this is the lay of the land. such a nation doesn't make sense. But Hashem excites those winds, blows those winds, because that's what we need. And the next step has to be, obviously, destroy them. May Hashem grant that it be done from the air, because you don't want to engage in mortal combat going in house to house there. My friends, there are two very different perspectives I believe we should have on these times. One is, and you excuse me for saying it at this very moment, a sense of celebration, a sense of this is miraculous. I see the Jewish people, the eternal people, going on their way, continuing in their ways, Hashem guiding them one step closer, almost at the point, almost at Mashiach coming, right there. And there should be a sense of anticipation and joy. But there also should be a sense of trepidation. And because when the IDF goes in, Rahman al-San, hopefully they won't have to go in, but if they have to go in fighting house-to-house urban warfare, every house being booby-trapped, every one of your enemies willing to die, wanting to die, it's going to be Rahman al-San, gruesome, and it's a horrific thought. And therefore we should be filled with trepidation, with fear, because we are, as a nation, we are in trouble. Netzach Yisrael le'yashaka, the Jewish nation will live on forever. But not every individual in the nation has such a guarantee. And every one of us has a certain level of danger. But nevertheless, I believe both feelings should be there. A sense of perspective, of a national pride, a national sense of Hashem is guiding us. We are the chosen nation, the exalted nation, the only nation of Hashem, and Hashem is leading us every step of the way, and we are almost at the cusp, almost at the point of Mashiach finally redeeming us, Hashem finally revealing Himself, and the whole world will see the folly of their ways, the holiness of the Jewish people. But at the same time, we should have that sense of celebration, sense of anticipation. We also have to have a sense of dread, because we are in mortal danger. We are in mortal danger, and it's very scary times. And I'd like to finish with one last observation. And that is, as you're well aware, from Gaza, there are many missiles that have been fired. Since the beginning of this war, less than 10 days ago, 6,000 missiles have been fired from Gaza to Israel. Many times under 10 kilometers, many times within 2 kilometers. And while it's true that the Iron Dome is quite effective and very impressive, the Iron Dome shoots down between 90, sometimes 97% of the missiles that are shot. What that means in plain language is there are about 300 to 500 missiles that should have landed on populated centers. And by all natural accounts, there should be thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dead Israelis. Do you understand what 300 missiles, 300 rockets landing on population centers means? The destruction, the devastation is beyond description. Yet, interestingly enough, there are some casualties, but a minuscule amount, a tiny amount. And gee golly, the question is why? For some inexplicable reason, these missiles seem to miss. They're fired and they land in open areas. They're fired right directly close to population centers, and they land off target. And it's very hard to explain. And a Hamas commander was asked the question, a 4-year-old can aim better. What's with you guys? And listen to his words. He said these words, we do aim our rockets, but their God changes their path in midair. And if that doesn't convince you yet, listen to the words of a secular Israeli who was a commander of an Iron Dome battalion. And he explains that the Iron Dome is very sophisticated. From the moment the rocket is launched from Gaza, it begins tracking it. It'll tell you the trajectory, tell you the speed, tell you within 200 meters exactly where that missile will land. Now keep in mind, every interceptor missile is quite expensive, $60,000 to $100,000, so they use them very guardedly. In any case, this commander saw a missile that was launched from Gaza that was going to land right in Tel Aviv in the train center, and this was a heavily populated area, and there was no way there'd be enough time to get people out of the area. So he quickly told the battery, fire an interceptor missile. They fired an interceptor missile at the incoming missile, and it missed. Fire a second one. The second one missed. This was very rare. It's very rare to have 2 misses. Fire a third, and the third missed. And he said to himself, he realized he has 4 seconds. 4 seconds till this missile is going to land on the central rail station in Tel Aviv. He quickly sent out a message to emergency medical personnel, get to the scene, there are going to be hundreds, thousands of casualties, get there quick. And then he says he's watching on the screen, watching on the monitor, the missile's path is this way. Suddenly, somehow, a powerful eastern wind comes, blows the missile off course, and it lands in the sea. And he screams out, there's a God! There's a God! There's a God in the world! When you see the redemption of the Jewish people, when you see the salvation, when you see open miracles, you have to say, I get it. Hashem has a plan. We're close, very close. We don't understand exactly, we don't understand the intricacies. We know the message. We know our mission. We know the plan. May Hashem redeem us imminently. May Mashiach come immediately. And may not a single other Jewish casualty, not a single drop of more Jewish blood be spilled.